Elon has always trusted science since he believed that technological advancements, data, and faith, religion, and spirituality provided the answers. Beliefs were something he had never given much thought to, but one night as he sat in his big, quiet house, he felt empty for the first time in his life. It was like a force pulling him somewhere, but he didn't know where, and even the excitement of space travel couldn't divert him. Why do we look for something more when we already have everything? He couldn't sleep, so he tossed and turned his head. Elon was a man of action, so when he couldn't figure something out, it frustrated him. But since money and reason couldn't solve this, he got out of bed and went to his research. Have you ever opened a book with no expectations and discovered something that transformed your life? Elon closed the Bible, his thoughts racing. He wasn't a man who trusted fate or destiny, but rather in intelligence and hard work. But now that he was standing by himself in the dark, something inside of him whispered that perhaps there was more to life than what he could see and touch, but he wasn't prepared to accept it. Have you ever had the feeling that something is changing but you're not prepared to face it yet? The days passed, but Elon was unable to shake the sensation that each time he closed his eyes, the Bible appeared and the words sounded as though they were beckoning to. He made an effort to ignore it by focusing more on his work, but it didn't help. Elon was regarded as a man of vision, and people looked up to him for his courage and determination, but now he was starting to feel like there was something more, something he had been missing all along. One evening, he found himself driving through the city, unable to sleep, as the emptiness only deepened, and he started to wonder, what if the things we build aren't the most important part of life? Once more, the streets were silent, and as he passed the buildings without giving them much thought, the lights were hazy. He parked in front of an old church after turning down a side street. The building was small, dilapidated, and seemed out of place in the modern world. Why do we sometimes find ourselves drawn to places we never expected to go? He sat in the car for a while, staring at the building, unsure of why he had come, but feeling as though he needed to be there. Eventually, he got out and approached the church, whose doors were unlocked. Have you ever entered a place that felt? Elon stood as if it were intended for you, even if you didn't get why the church was empty. He had not entered a church in years, possibly not since he was a child, but something about this moment felt right. He walked down the aisle and sat in one of the old wooden pews for the first time in a long time. Unsure of what to do next, he stood motionless and gazed around at the stained glass windows. He wasn't sure what he was meant to feel, but he sensed a sense of serenity and peace from the silent candles flickering in the corner and the cross over the altar. Could peace come from something you can't see? Could demonstrate that he was unsure of how long he sat there before getting up and leaving. The church as he stepped outside, the chilly night air touched his face. The city was still silent, but things were starting to alter inside of him. As if a seed had been planted in his heart and was slowly growing, pushing against everything he thought he knew. Elon Musk, the man who had built rockets, electric cars, and dreamed of colonizing Mars, was beginning to feel something strange that couldn't be explained by money or technology. Have you ever had the feeling that everything you believed in was suddenly? Elon was being questioned while seated in his poorly lit study. He gazed at the Bible on his desk and hesitated before reaching out for a. He wasn't sure what he was looking for a time before picking it up again, but something pulled him in and he turned the pages, pausing at odd spots and reading passages that seemed to speak to him directly. He was particularly drawn to a lyric that asked, "What is the point of a man acquiring the entire world and losing his soul?" After reading the lines a third time, Elon felt as though they were speaking directly to him. He had earned a great deal of wealth, influence, and power, but had he lost something? What if, in the process, all the world's achievement is unable to satisfy the gap in your? He had spent his entire life chasing the future, constantly searching for the next big thing, but for the first time, he was beginning to wonder if he had missed something significant along the way. He had founded businesses, transformed industries, and inspired millions of people, but in the quiet moments of the night, he felt empty as the hours passed. Elon couldn't get rid of the sensation that something more significant was going on. It seemed like everything had been building up to this point in his life, but he couldn't comprehend why he had always thought he was in control. His own fate, believing that hard work and creativity led to his success. Yet now he sits by alone in his mansion. He began to sense that something more was out there, something he couldn't explain or control. The idea that he was being guided towards something bigger than himself both excited and frightened him. Elon was a man who loved challenges and pushing the envelope of what was conceivable, but this one was different. It was a more personal, deeper problem that he wasn't sure how to handle with money or technology. He was unable to sleep, so he made the decision to take a drive. The streets were deserted, and the city lights were creating long shadows over. It was odd that he hadn't anticipated feeling anything at all, yet now it was all he could think about as he drove his thoughts back to the cathedral and the serenity he had experienced there. Have you ever found yourself drawn to a location you didn't understand without even recognizing it? Elon found himself driving back toward the church. He had no idea why, but something inside of him demanded explanations. When he arrived at the tiny structure, the parking lot was deserted, the interior lights were out, it was late, and the church was closed, yet he persisted despite it. He exited the vehicle and approached the front steps, gazing at the hefty wooden doors. He was unsure of what he was expecting, but for a brief moment he just stood there with his hands in his pockets, gazing up at the cross that hung over the entrance. He couldn't help but feel that something was waiting for him inside that would completely alter his life. What if the answers you've been looking for aren't where you expected them to be? Elon was a man who valued hard work and science over fate and destiny. Yet as he stood there looking up at the cross, he couldn't get rid of the sensation that he had. Couldn't get rid of the thought that he had been sent here for a purpose and had dedicated his life to making a difference. Yet, he was now beginning to question whether the world had been attempting to alter him. Elon took a long breath as the wind began to rustle the leaves on the ground. He wasn't ready to go inside just yet, but he knew he would return because something inside of him was changing and he couldn't deny it. What if the purpose of your life isn't what you believed it to be? Elon's mind was racing with questions as he drove away from the church. He didn't have all the answers, but for the first time in a long time, he didn't feel the need to. There was an odd sense of peace in having them, in letting go of the urge without knowing, to control everything. He had spent his life chasing the future, but now for the first time he was starting to look at the present, and Elon Musk realized that his life was about to change in ways he could never have predicted. The following morning, Elon woke up with a sense of purpose he hadn't felt in years. It wasn't about his businesses or his most recent project, but something deeper, something he couldn't quite put into words. He felt a strange urgency, as if he were about to discover something that would change. However, his thoughts kept returning to the chapel he hadn't visited when he sipped his morning coffee in his kitchen. Entered, but the sense of calm he had felt the previous evening remained with him. It was like a tiny light that had been ignited inside of him, and he was unable to ignore it. Have you ever felt as though you were about to experience something amazing but were unsure of what it was? Elon was never one to sit around and wait for things to happen. Instead, he was a man of action, constantly going forward and looking for the next great thing. However, for the first time, he felt the need to slow down in order to take a step, return and reflect deeply about his life's direction. As the day progressed, he discovered meetings that often required all of his focus looked pointless, emails went unread, and calls were disregarded because his mind was elsewhere, trying to find something he couldn't quite. Elon returned to his study that afternoon and found himself gazing at the Bible. He hadn't read much of it, but the few passages he had read seemed to speak to him in a way that he couldn't explain. What if the answers you've been looking for were always right in front of you? Elon picked up the Bible and started turning the pages, not sure what he was looking at. But he couldn't stop reading since the words on the pages seemed to be speaking to him directly, as though they were composed specifically for him. For the first time in his life, Elon started to doubt his own beliefs. He had always thought that technology was the solution to the world's problems and that innovation would save humanity, but now he was beginning to wonder that there was more to life than just success. He had never really given these concepts much thought before because his life had always been about progress and pushing the boundaries of what was possible. If something more existed than what could be quantified, and imagine that the future you've been striving for turns out not to be the one you were meant for. He had always been so sure of himself and confident in his vision for the future, but now he was unsure of anything. There was a persistent feeling in the back of his mind that he was about to discover something that would change everything, but he wasn't sure what it was yet, but he knew he couldn't ignore it. Elon closed the Bible and leaned back in his chair, his mind racing. He was compelled to follow something that was calling to him wherever it might lead. Over the next few days, Elon, the lead, managed his numerous businesses while hazily attending his regular meetings and phone calls. Felt robotic, as though his body was merely going through the motions, but his mind was elsewhere. His thoughts kept returning to the silent night outside the church and the strange calm he had experienced simply standing there. The pressure and noise of his everyday life seemed far away, as if they belonged to someone else. Have you ever had an epiphany that caused you to reevaluate everything you believed to be true? One evening, as the sun was setting, Elon found himself walking once more. But at first he had no idea where he was going, simply following his feet through the silent streets. However, he soon discovered that his route was returning him to the same tiny chapel he had previously visited. Instead of stopping at the stairs, he opened the large oak door and entered. The air was cold and still had a subtle smell of ancient wood and candles. Via the stained glass windows, the gentle glimmer of the residual daylight created vibrant patterns on the stone floor. It was so different from the world he knew. The never-ending hum of technology, the pressure to meet deadlines, and the never-ending need to accomplish more. That Elon remained there for a while, allowing the silence to envelop him like a blanket. To be more specific, have you ever experienced serenity at an unexpected location? Elon felt a sense of reverence that he couldn't quite put into words as he moved slowly down the aisle, his footsteps echoing softly in the empty church. He wasn't sure what had brought him here, but for the first time in a long time, he felt at ease, and the questions that had been racing through his head for days started to settle, even though he still didn't have the answers. Elon stood in front of the enormous wooden cross that was hanging on the wall in front of the church, his gaze following the straightforward yet potent image. Before, he had never really thought about religion. It had always seemed to him that. He sat down in one of the pews and rested his hands on the back of the seat in front of him. For a long time, he just sat in silence, allowing the silence of the church to fill him. It was an antiquated method of explaining the universe, something that science and logic had long since replaced. But now as he stood there, he couldn't get rid of the feeling that there was more to it than he had ever realized. What if you've been looking for answers in the wrong places all along? His mind, which is typically buzzing with plans and ideas, was strangely calm as he considered everything in his life. He had always thought that he had completed everything he still wanted to do. His life's work was to advance humanity and build a better future for all. But now that he was sitting here in this little, silent church, he wasn't entirely sure. Have you ever wondered if your purpose differs from what you've always believed? As the minutes went by, Elon started to sense something stirring inside of him. At first, it was just a faint whisper in the back of his mind, but it gradually became stronger until it was impossible to ignore. It wasn't a voice exactly, but it seemed like something was trying to get his attention. He recalled the Bible verse he had read a few days prior about how it benefits a man to gain the entire world and give up his soul were words that had affected him in a way that he didn't fully comprehend at the time. But now that he was sitting in this church, they made more sense. He had amassed a great deal of wealth, power, and influence, but at what cost had he lost something along the way? What if you've lived your entire life pursuing something that will never make you happy? Elon closed his eyes and leaned back in the pew. He didn't know what was going on, but he knew that something inside of him was shifting. It seemed like the walls of ambition, reason, and logic he had erected around himself were shifting, were beginning to break for the first time, and he was letting himself feel exposed enough to acknowledge that. Perhaps he didn't have all the answers. Have you ever let go of everything you knew to see where life leads you? He didn't know how long he sat there lost in thought. The church was deserted, and the light outside had turned to darkness. Elon finally got up and walked back toward the door, taking a deep breath of the cool night air and feeling lighter than he had in a long time. He wasn't sure where this journey was taking him, but he was certain that he couldn't go back. Now what if you've just taken the beginning of a journey that will transform everything? Elon got into his vehicle and drove home with his head still racing with ideas and feelings. He didn't yet have all the answers, but for the first time in a long time, he felt as though he was headed in the right direction. As he pulled into his driveway, the sense of emptiness he had been experiencing began to fade and was replaced by a calm sense of purpose. Elon understood that whatever was happening to him was just the beginning and that it wouldn't be a simple or quick process, but he was prepared. He felt prepared to face whatever life had in store for him for the first time in years. Have you ever felt that way? He entered his home and began a journey that would alter everything you believed to be true. The familiar surroundings felt different in some way, even if the outside world was the same. However, Elon Musk was a different person inside than he had been a few days prior. The road ahead was uncertain, but he was positive that he was prepared to find the answers he had been looking for his whole life.